The ballroom froze. On the giant screen behind the bride, a grainy video flickered to life. Delaney, the radiant bride, locked in a kiss with a man who wasn't her husband. Gasps cut through the air like broken glass, the groom's face drained of all color, and my mother's hand clutched her pearls as if they could shield her from the truth. In that instant, I wasn't just the forgotten sister shoved to a corner table. I was the one holding the detonator. But ask yourself, if your own family treated you as nothing more than wallpaper, would you have done the same? I was born into a house where love had a hierarchy. At the top was my sister Delaney, the golden child. She had the blonde hair, the porcelain smile, the kind of presence that made people lean in when she spoke. Teachers adored her, neighbors complimented her, and my parents. Well, they treated her as if she were the crown jewel of the Whitmore name. And then there was me, Iris. The afterthought. The shadow. I grew up hearing phrases like, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Or, "Delaney's always been the special one." At first, I thought it was just a phase, that one day I would step into my own spotlight. But the truth is, there was never a spotlight meant for me. I remember birthdays where her gifts towered like monuments, wrapped in glossy paper and satin bows, while mine were practical things. A sweater, a notebook, things chosen with obligation, not love. And I remember dinners where my mother would gush about Delaney's grades, her beauty, her endless potential, then glance at me only to sigh as if my very existence were a disappointment. My father was the only one who ever seemed to notice me, but even he was too quiet, too complicit. He would pat my shoulder, give me a small smile, but he never spoke up. Silence was his form of survival in a house where my mother ruled. Over time, I learned my role, the listener, the extra, the one who doesn't complain. I built a life outside their walls, a modest apartment in Brooklyn, freelance work as a photographer. My world was smaller, simpler, honest. But in their eyes, it was failure. Freelance, my mother would sneer, twisting the word as if it meant unemployed. To them, success meant power, money, being seen. And I was invisible. I should have been numb by the time the wedding came around. 38 years of this should have hardened me completely. But family cruelty is different. It doesn't dull with age. It sharpens. And by the time Delaney announced her engagement, I already knew what the wedding would be. Another theater performance where I'd play the role of unwanted background character. And yet, I went. I went because part of me still clung to the impossible hope that maybe, just once, they would see me. That maybe I would be treated as family, as a sister, as a daughter. But deep down, another part of me knew better. And that part, the part that had been stepped on, silenced, humiliated for decades, was waiting, watching, gathering its strength in the shadows. Because when you are ignored for long enough, you start to realize something terrifying. Silence isn't weakness, it's a weapon. The ballroom glowed like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across marble floors. Gilded mirrors reflected the laughter of the rich and beautiful, and the air smelled of roses, champagne, and seared scallops. Every detail screamed wealth, elegance, perfection. And then there was my place. A lonely little table pushed against the far wall, tucked beside a coat rack and beneath the red glow of an emergency exit sign. No centerpiece of white roses, no crystal flute, no polished silverware. Just a single porcelain plate, with one dry beige piece of bread sitting on it. That was my meal. At first, I thought it was a mistake, that maybe the servers hadn't finished setting the table. But then I saw the way people looked at me as they passed. Sideways glances, quick whispers, smirks half hidden behind champagne glasses. This wasn't an accident. It was an arrangement. And of course, it didn't take long for my mother to find me. She appeared in a shimmer of silver silk and pearls, her perfume sharp and cloying. Evelyn Whitmore, queen of appearances, master of cruelty disguised as charm. She placed a delicate hand on my shoulder, leaned down and whispered with a smile sweet enough to curdle milk. "Darling, I see you found your place." Her eyes flicked down at the bread, then back up to my face, cold, dismissive. "With your freelance career, I suppose a simple meal is rather appropriate. Humble. This is what you're used to, isn't it?" She didn't wait for a reply. She never did. She just drifted back into the crowd, swallowed by laughter and music, leaving me with the stale bread and the heat of humiliation crawling up my neck. And then came Delaney, the bride, my sister. She floated toward me in her custom lace gown, radiant under the chandeliers, her train whispering across the floor like a queen's robe. The room seemed to hush around her. People always made space for Delaney. She stopped at my table, looked at the bread, looked at me, and smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but with that perfect blend of pity and superiority she had perfected since childhood. "Hello, big sister. You made it." Her gaze swept over my emerald dress, simple, modest, chosen carefully so I wouldn't overshadow her. Charming, very minimalist. "I've always admired how you managed to make everything look so affordable. It's a gift, really. You make even the most ordinary things look cheaper." She said it softly, sweetly, so no one else would hear. A dagger wrapped in velvet. And then she was gone, spinning back into the sea of applause and admiration, leaving me frozen in place. I looked down at the bread again. My throat burned. My chest ached. But more than anything, I felt the same thing I'd felt my whole life. Small. Insignificant. Wallpaper. But this time, something inside me shifted, because in that ballroom, surrounded by their glittering world, I wasn't just humiliated. I was underestimated. And there is nothing more dangerous than a woman who has been both. I tried to disappear into the wallpaper that night, to sink into my chair, to let the music and laughter wash over me until it was time to leave. But humiliation doesn't fade so easily. It clings. It festers. At some point, I slipped away from my table, telling myself I needed air. The hallway beyond the ballroom was quiet, the hum of the party muffled behind heavy doors. I followed the sound of my own heels clicking on marble until I found myself near the coat room, and that's when I heard them. Two voices. Low, sharp, familiar. My mother's. My sister's. I froze. "It's already done," my mother whispered. "The house, the vineyard condo, the legacy shares. They're all under your name now. Your father hasn't the slightest clue." Delaney laughed softly, a laugh I'd heard 1,000 times when she'd gotten away with something. "Perfect. Once the wedding is sealed, everything's mine. And Jasper's family will keep pouring money into the company. Security, status, everything I deserve." A pause, and then, my name. "What about Iris?" my mother asked, almost dismissive. "She?" Delaney scoffed. "She won't last long. She's a phase, not a future. She's just background, like wallpaper." Wallpaper. The word hit harder than any slap. I pressed my back against the wall, breath tight, heart pounding in my ears. For 38 years, I had endured their cruelty. I had swallowed their dismissive smiles, their cutting remarks, their indifference. But this was different. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just favoritism. This was erasure. They weren't planning to leave me behind. They already had. In their eyes, I wasn't even family anymore. I wasn't even a person. Something cracked inside me. The fragile thread of hope I'd been clinging to snapped. And in its place came something else. Something cold. Something sharp. I stood there in the dark hallway, their voices still drifting toward me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. That night, after the wedding rehearsal dinner, I went back to my apartment in Brooklyn. I should have collapsed into bed, drowned in exhaustion and shame. But instead, I sat in the dark with my laptop open, the glow of the screen burning into my tired eyes. On the table beside me was the emerald clutch I'd carried. My hand drifted inside, brushing against the cool metal of the small voice recorder I'd slipped in before the wedding. I hadn't even thought about it at the time, just a habit, really. As a photographer, I often carried little tools to capture fleeting details. But now, replaying the muffled conversation I had recorded in the hallway, I realized what I had. Proof. Their words, their betrayal, their contempt for me, caught forever in sound. It should have broken me. But instead, something dangerous flickered to life in my chest. Curiosity. What else could I capture? I started small. Screenshots of texts Delaney had sent late at night, messages that didn't read like those of a devoted fiancé. A grainy photo from a bar, Delaney's hand brushing the arm of a man who wasn't Jasper. A whisper from an old friend of mine who worked in corporate law, hinting at shady asset transfers in Whitmore Holdings. Piece by piece, the fragments came together. And with each new discovery, I felt a strange kind of energy surging through me. Power, but also guilt. Late at night, I would sit staring at the evidence folders piling up on my desktop, whispering to myself, "This isn't revenge. This is protection. This is survival." Yet I knew the truth. I wasn't gathering evidence to save myself. I was gathering evidence to destroy them. The thought should have scared me. It should have sent me running to delete everything, to pretend I never overheard those words. But instead, it felt inevitable. Like I'd been waiting my entire life for this moment. For years, I had been their silent shadow, the invisible daughter, the disposable sister. But shadows have teeth when you step too close. And as I stared at the screen, at the photos, at the recordings, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Control. This wasn't just a spark. This was fire. And once it started burning, I knew I wasn't going to put it out. Once the spark was lit, I couldn't put it out. But fire without direction just burns everything down. I needed control, precision, a plan. So I worked in silence. By day, I lived my modest life in Brooklyn, shooting portraits, editing photos, pretending to be the quiet, forgettable Iris my family thought they knew. By night, I became something else. I combed through Delaney's digital footprints, text messages that reeked of secrecy, late-night calls made from parking garages, receipts for hotel rooms under fake names. I dug through public records, tracing the property transfers my mother had whispered about, finding documents that confirmed every shady shift of wealth from my father to Delaney. I wasn't just documenting betrayal anymore. I was building a case. Every file, every photo, every recording was carefully cataloged into folders, labeled, dated, untouchable. I hired discreet help, too. A quiet IT freelancer who owed me a favor uploaded security footage from a downtown garage. Grainy, but unmistakable. Delaney, wrapped in the same beige coat she wore to her engagement party, pressed against Cole Maddox in the shadow of his car. Their kiss wasn't casual, it was hunger, familiar, the kind of kiss that carries history. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. And so did I. But it wasn't only about collecting evidence, it was about timing, execution. This couldn't be a tantrum. It had to be theater. I researched wedding schedules, mapped out the reception's AV system, even identified the technician who'd be running the screens. A kid, barely out of college, underpaid and overworked. The kind who'd be more than willing to take cash for a simple, special presentation. I paid him in advance, told him there would be a surprise tribute video. He didn't ask questions. People rarely do when money's involved, and all the while, I said nothing. When my mother called with her sharp-edged reminders, "Don't embarrass us, Iris. Remember to wear something simple." When Delaney texted me a photo of her gown, followed by, "Don't worry, you'll never outshine me anyway," I said nothing. I smiled when they looked at me. I nodded when they gave orders, I played the role I had always played, quiet, invisible, safe. But inside, the storm was already gathering. For 38 years, I had swallowed their poison. At this wedding, they thought they'd fed me my final humiliation, dry bread and empty stares. What they didn't know was that I'd already prepared the feast. And the main course was the truth. The wedding unfolded like a polished performance. The vows were recited beneath a vaulted ceiling dripping with roses. My father walked Delaney down the aisle stiffly, as though carrying a crown that didn't belong to him. The guests wept on cue, their applause swelling like a rehearsed symphony. I watched it all from my exile at the corner table, dry bread still mocking me from its plate. But my heart didn't ache anymore. It beat steady, calm, purposeful, because I knew what was coming. I waited, through the toasts dripping with false sentiment, through the endless courses I was never served, through the speeches praising Delaney's beauty, her ambition, her perfection. I waited until the master of ceremonies, flushed with champagne and confidence, smiled into the microphone and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, before we open the floor for dancing, if anyone would like to share a final toast, now is the time." That was my cue. I rose. My chair made no sound against the marble floor. I walked the length of the ballroom, slow and deliberate, the murmur of voices dimming with every step. A groomsman blinked in confusion as I took the microphone from his hand. I smiled, just faintly, and turned to face the sea of faces. 200 eyes, glittering beneath chandeliers. "Thank you," I said, my voice carrying easily in the hush. "I'm Iris, the bride's sister. I won't be offering a toast tonight. Instead, I'd like to share something a little more meaningful." A ripple of confusion passed through the room. My mother's lips tightened. Delaney's eyes narrowed. I turned toward the AV booth. The young technician I'd paid hours earlier looked at me, waiting. I nodded. He inserted the USB drive. The screen behind the head table flickered. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then the first image appeared. A text message, blown up and crystal clear for all to see. "Tonight. One last time." My bed, not Jasper's. A wave of murmurs swept the ballroom, confused, sharp, uneasy. Then came the video, grainy, shaky, but undeniable. A parking garage. Delaney in her beige coat. Cole Maddox's arms pulling her close. Their kiss. Hungry, desperate, far too familiar. Gasps broke across the room like glass shattering. I heard Jasper's breath hitch, saw the color drain from his face. My mother's hand shot to her pearls, gripping them so tightly her knuckles turned white. But it wasn't over. The video cut to audio, my mother's voice, crisp and venomous. "I've already moved the house, the vineyard condo, and the legacy shares into your name. Reginald has no idea." Then Delaney's voice, smug and triumphant. "After the wedding, everything's mine. I'll make sure you're set, Mom. No more pretending with Dad. Iris is just background. Like wallpaper." The ballroom froze. Silence pressed down like a physical weight. I stood on the stage, the microphone steady in my hand, watching their perfect empire fracture in real time. This was it. The moment they finally saw me. Not as wallpaper, not as a shadow, but as the reckoning they never expected. The room erupted, not with applause, not with cheers, but with gasps, shrieks, and the scraping of chairs across polished floors. Conversations that had been flowing just moments before died instantly, replaced by shocked whispers and frantic murmurs. Jasper, the groom, stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the screen, at the proof of the betrayal he had trusted. Slowly, deliberately, he removed the platinum wedding band from his finger and placed it on the table. "I love to lie in a white dress," he said quietly, almost too soft for the room to hear, but everyone did. The words cut through the air like a knife. Then, without another glance, he walked away. Delaney's perfect composure shattered. Makeup streaked down her cheeks as she sobbed openly, the image of elegance crumbling into desperation and fear. She reached for my mother, as if seeking support, but Evelyn Whitmore, queen of appearances, was frozen, a statue of horror and disbelief. And then came the whispers of business collapse. Douglas Langston, Jasper's father, rose from the back of the room, his voice sharp and icy. The Langston Group severs all ties with Whitmore Holdings, effective immediately. Gasps multiplied. Phones were drawn, calls were made. The empire that had taken decades to build began to unravel in real time, all from a corner table and a single USB drive. Cole Maddox stepped forward, his face grim, confirming the truth everyone had just seen. "It's true," he said. "She told me it was temporary, that she needed security before she could be with me. I was a fool, but I'm not the only one who was lied to." The ballroom, once a temple of wealth, perfection, and celebration, became a theater of devastation. Chairs were pushed aside. Guests whispered frantic conjectures. Some ran for exits. Others simply stared, frozen, unable to process the betrayal. And I stood there, microphone in hand, feeling none of the triumphant glee I expected. I felt the quiet satisfaction of truth delivered, the cold release of justice enacted, but also the sharp, echoing emptiness that comes when you destroy something that was once a family. For the first time in my life, the world was watching me. And for the first time, I wasn't invisible. 200 guests, a bride in ruin, a groom betrayed, a mother paralyzed, all of it unfolding because I finally chose to speak. Iris Whitmore was no longer a shadow. She was the reckoning. The chaos faded, not with a bang or applause, but with the slow, suffocating hush that follows destruction. Chairs had toppled. Half-empty champagne flutes glinted on the floor. Guests slipped away, murmuring in disbelief, leaving echoes of gossip behind them like shards of broken glass. I walked away from the stage without ceremony, my heels silent on the marble. My mother's face haunted me, not in anger, not even sorrow, but in that frozen, hollow realization that the world she had built on appearances and deceit had been ripped away in one night. Delaney was gone from the room entirely, her sobs carried away by attendants. I didn't chase her. She had been my shadow once, and shadows cling until you let them go. Back in Brooklyn, my apartment was quiet, honest, small, modest, the kind of life I had built outside their suffocating empire of perfection. But in the silence, I felt the true weight of my actions. I had delivered justice, yes. I had exposed lies and betrayal, shattering illusions that had taken decades to construct. The Langstons had withdrawn their alliances. My father had finally been forced to see the depth of deceit in his own home. Society pages feasted on scandal. And yet, there was an emptiness that followed. No applause, no congratulations, no sense of relief beyond the cold clarity that the truth had finally been seen. Revenge is a strange companion. It gives power, yes, but it takes something in return. The faces of my family, once familiar, now seemed like strangers in photographs. The laughter of the past, now hollow echoes. I had won, but the victory carried a cost I could not quantify. I picked up my camera, the tool of my honest work, and focused on the small details of my apartment. The sunlight spilling across the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the steady rhythm of life that had nothing to do with wealth appearances or validation. In the end, the dry bread had been their final offer, their attempt to diminish me. But I had feasted instead on something far greater: freedom. Iris Whitmore was no longer wallpaper, no longer a shadow, and in the stillness I began to rebuild, not for them, not for approval, not for revenge, but for myself. Truth had its day, and in that truth I found a fragile kind of peace,